Sarah Martinez walked slowly down Central Avenue every morning at exactly 7:30. Her gray hair was tied back in a neat bun, and she wore the same dark blue coat that had seen many winters. She carried a small brown purse and walked with careful steps on the cracked sidewalk. The city around her was waking up with the sound of cars and buses and people rushing to work. At the bus stop on the corner of Central and Oak Street, there was something special that most people did not notice. The city had put a piano there 6 months ago as part of their new program to bring music to everyone. It was an old upright piano painted bright red with the words "Play Me" written in white letters across the top. The paint was already starting to chip, and someone had scratched their name into the side. Sarah had been coming to this bus stop every day for 3 weeks now. She did not need to take the bus anywhere. She lived just 4 blocks away in a small apartment above the flower shop. But every morning she would sit on the wooden bench next to the piano and look at it with gentle eyes. She would reach out, sometimes, and touch the keys very softly, but she never pressed them down to make any sound. The other people waiting for the bus did not know what to think about the old woman, who came every day but never played the piano. Some of them whispered to each other when they thought she could not hear. They wondered why she bothered to come if she was not going to play anything. Others felt sorry for her and thought maybe she was lonely and had nowhere else to go. Mrs. Chen, who worked at the bakery down the street, would sometimes see Sarah through her shop window. She noticed that Sarah always sat very straight with her hands folded in her lap. There was something about the way Sarah looked at the piano that made Mrs. Chen think the old woman knew something about music. But Sarah never made a sound, and Mrs. Chen was too busy with her customers to go outside and ask. The morning commuters were always in a hurry. They would stand near the bus stop, checking their phones and looking down the street for their bus to come. Most of them did not pay attention to Sarah or the piano. They had important jobs to get to and meetings to attend. The piano was just part of the street furniture to them, like the trash cans and the street signs, but there were always a few people who noticed Sarah sitting there day after day. Some of them started to recognize her and would nod politely when they saw her. Young mother with 2 small children would sometimes smile at Sarah when she walked by. The children were always curious about the piano and wanted to play it, but their mother would pull them along because they were late for school. Sarah watched all of this with quiet eyes. She saw the busy people and the children and the way everyone moved through their morning routines. She remembered when she used to be in a hurry too many years ago. But now she had all the time in the world and nowhere she needed to be except right here, next to this piano. The weather was getting colder. As October turned into November, Sarah wore a thin scarf around her neck, and sometimes her hands looked a little stiff from the cool air. But she still came every morning and sat in the same spot. The piano bench was actually more comfortable than the wooden bench, but Sarah never sat on it. She seemed to think it was not her place to sit there. One morning, a teenager with spiky hair and a leather jacket came to the bus stop. He looked at the piano and then at Sarah sitting quietly beside it. He walked over and banged out a few loud notes on the keyboard just to make noise. The sound was harsh and out of tune, and it made some of the other people look annoyed. Sarah did not react at all. She just kept looking straight ahead with the same peaceful expression on her face. The teenager played a few more random notes and then got bored and walked away. When his bus came, Sarah waited until he was gone, and then she reached out very carefully and touched the same keys he had just played. She touched them so gently that no sound came out, but her fingers moved like she was trying to fix something or make it right again. An old man who came to the bus stop every Tuesday and Thursday started to notice this pattern. His name was Frank, and he had worked as a janitor at the music school downtown for 30 years before he retired. Frank knew something about pianos and musicians. He could tell by the way Sarah held her hands and the way her fingers curved when she touched the keys that she was not just some random old lady. There was something different about her. Frank wanted to ask Sarah about her connection to music, but he was a shy man who did not like to bother people. He would watch her from the corner of his eye and wonder what her story was. Sometimes he thought about bringing her a cup of coffee from the shop across the street, but he was worried she might think he was being too forward. The piano itself was not in very good condition. Some of the keys stuck when you pressed them, and others made no sound at all. The city maintenance crew was supposed to tune it every few months, but they were always busy with other things. Children had spilled juice on it, and someone had tried to carve their initials into the wood. But Sarah treated it like it was the most precious thing in the world. She would sometimes take a tissue from her purse and very carefully wipe dust off the keys or the music stand. She did this when she thought no one was looking. It was like she was taking care of an old friend who could not take care of itself anymore. The way she cleaned the piano was gentle and loving, like a mother caring for a sick child. As the days went by, more people started to notice the old woman who came every morning but never played. Some of them thought it was strange behavior. Others thought it was sad. A few people thought maybe she did not know how to play and was just pretending to be interested in music. But no one asked her directly, and Sarah never volunteered any information about herself. The bus stop piano had been put there to bring joy and music to the neighborhood. The city council thought people would love having a chance to play music while they waited for their transportation. But most people were too busy or too shy to try playing in front of strangers. The piano sat silent most of the time, except for the occasional child who would bang on the keys or the teenager who would play a few rough chords. Sarah seemed to understand that the piano was lonely. She gave it the attention and respect that no one else bothered to give. Even though she never made any music with it, she was the only person who treated it like a real instrument instead of just a piece of street art. Her daily visits were like a promise to the piano that someone cared about its purpose and its potential to create beautiful sounds. Every morning, as Sarah sat beside the piano, she would close her eyes for just a moment and listen to the sounds of the city around her. The traffic and the footsteps and the voices all became like a symphony to her trained ear. She heard rhythms and melodies in the everyday noise that other people missed. And in those quiet moments, she would smile just a little bit, as if she was hearing music that no one else could hear. Marcus Thompson stepped off his apartment building steps with his phone already pressed to his ear. He was 28 years old and worked at a big advertising company downtown. His black suit was expensive and his shoes were shiny, and he always carried a leather briefcase that made him feel important. Marcus talked fast and walked fast, and everything about him seemed to be in a hurry. The bus stop on Central Avenue was just 2 blocks from his apartment, and Marcus had been using it for 6 months now. He preferred taking the bus to driving, because he could check his emails and make phone calls during the ride. Time was money to Marcus, and he hated wasting even a few minutes of his day. The first time Marcus noticed the old woman sitting by the piano, he did not think much about it. There were always strange people at bus stops in the city. But after seeing her there every single morning for 2 weeks, he started to get annoyed. She just sat there doing nothing and taking up space on the bench where other people might want to sit. Marcus was having a particularly bad week at work. His boss had rejected 3 of his campaign ideas, and there was a big presentation coming up on Friday that could make or break his promotion. He was stressed and tired and looking for someone to blame for his problems. When he saw Sarah sitting peacefully by the piano that Tuesday morning, something inside him snapped. Jake Wilson was Marcus's work friend who sometimes took the same bus. Jake was also young and ambitious, but he was quieter than Marcus and usually just listened when Marcus complained about things. This morning Jake was standing next to Marcus when Marcus started talking loudly about the old woman. Marcus pointed at Sarah and said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear that she was probably crazy or homeless. He said she came every day and pretended to be interested in the piano, but never actually played anything. Marcus laughed and said she was probably just trying to get attention, or maybe she thought she was some kind of musician but was too scared to prove it. A few other people at the bus stop heard Marcus talking, and some of them started to smile. There was a young woman in a red coat who giggled when Marcus made a joke about old people who lived in the past. A man in a blue uniform nodded along when Marcus said that public pianos were stupid anyway and just attracted weird people who had nothing better to do. Sarah heard every word but she did not turn around or react in any way. She kept looking straight ahead with her hands folded in her lap. Her face stayed calm and peaceful, but if someone had looked closely, they might have seen a small flicker of sadness in her eyes. Marcus felt good about getting a reaction from the other commuters. It had been a long time since anyone had laughed at his jokes or paid attention to what he was saying. At work, he was just another employee trying to impress the boss, but here at the bus stop, he could be the center of attention for a few minutes. The next morning, Marcus looked for Sarah as soon as he got to the bus stop. She was there in her usual spot, wearing the same dark coat and sitting in the same quiet way. Marcus walked over to Jake and started talking about her again. This time he was even louder and more cruel with his comments. Marcus said that old people who could not afford to live in nice places often hung around public spaces because they had nowhere else to go. He said Sarah probably lived in some tiny apartment and came to the bus stop because she was lonely and wanted people to notice her. He made jokes about how she touched the piano keys but never made any sound, like she was pretending to play invisible. Music, more people started to pay attention to. Marcus and his daily commentary about Sarah. Some of them thought he was being mean, but they did not want to get involved in someone else's business. Others found his jokes entertaining and looked forward to hearing what he would say next. A few people started taking pictures with their phones when Marcus was talking because they thought it was funny. Sarah began to arrive at the bus stop a few minutes earlier each day to avoid the worst of the morning rush and Marcus's comments. But Marcus noticed this change and started arriving earlier too. He told Jake that he was conducting a social experiment to see how long the old woman would keep up her act before she gave up and found somewhere else to spend her time. By Thursday of that week, Marcus had attracted a small group of regular followers who enjoyed his morning entertainment. There was a woman named Lisa who worked at a bank and always wore too much makeup. There was a college student named Derek who carried a skateboard and thought Marcus was the coolest adult he had ever met. There was also a middle-aged man named Robert who sold insurance and laughed too loud at everything Marcus said. Marcus started to plan his jokes the night before. He would think of new things to say about Sarah and practice his timing so that he could get the biggest laughs from his audience. He began to see himself as a performer putting on a daily show for the entertainment of the other commuters. Sarah's routine never changed despite the growing attention and mockery. She still arrived at the same time and sat in the same spot and looked at the piano with the same gentle expression. She still sometimes reached out to touch the keys without making any sound. She still carefully wiped dust off the piano. When she thought no one was looking, the only thing that changed was that Sarah seemed to sit a little straighter when Marcus started talking about her. Her shoulders would tense up slightly and she would hold her purse a little tighter in her lap. But she never turned around to look at him, and she never said anything in response to his comments. Frank the old janitor continued to watch this daily drama unfold with growing concern. He could see that Sarah was being hurt by Marcus's words, even though she did not show it openly. Frank had worked around musicians for 30 years, and he knew that people who truly loved music were often sensitive souls who felt things very deeply. Frank wanted to say something to defend Sarah, but he was not good with confrontation, and Marcus was young and confident and surrounded by supporters. Frank worried that if he tried to speak up, Marcus would just turn his cruel humor on him instead. So Frank stayed quiet, but he made sure to smile kindly at Sarah whenever she looked in his direction. The piano itself seemed to be suffering from the negative attention too. Someone had written mean words on the side of it with a marker. A few of the keys had been damaged by people pressing them too hard trying to make noise during Marcus's performances. The beautiful red paint was getting more chipped and scratched every day, but Sarah continued to treat the piano with the same respect and care that she had shown from the beginning. She still cleaned it gently and touched it lovingly like it was something precious. Her dedication to the instrument never wavered, no matter how much people laughed at her or made jokes about her daily visits. Marcus was feeling more confident and popular than he had in months. His audience was growing, and people at work had started to hear stories about the funny guy at the bus stop who made jokes about the crazy piano lady. Marcus thought he had found his calling as a comedian and entertainer. He had no idea that his cruel game was about to backfire in a way that would change his life forever. The Friday morning air was crisp and cold as Marcus walked toward the bus stop with extra confidence in his step. His presentation at work had gone well the day before, and his boss had actually complimented him on his creative ideas. Marcus felt like he was on top of the world and ready to put on his best performance yet for his growing audience of commuters. Sarah was already sitting in her usual spot when Marcus arrived. She wore a thin gray scarf around her neck, and her hands looked slightly red from the cold air. The piano keys had a thin layer of frost on them that sparkled in the early morning sunlight. Sarah had brought a small cloth from home and was gently wiping the moisture away from the keys with careful movements. Marcus saw this as the perfect opportunity to start his daily show. He walked over to Jake and spoke in his loudest voice, yet so that everyone within 50 feet could hear him clearly. Marcus said that the old woman was now cleaning the piano like she owned it or worked for the city maintenance department. He laughed and said maybe she thought she was the official piano caretaker. Even though nobody had asked her to do the job, the crowd of regular listeners had grown larger over the past week. Lisa from the bank was there with her bright red lipstick and her phone ready to record. Derek, the college student, had brought 2 of his friends who wanted to see the famous piano lady for themselves. Robert, the insurance salesman, was eating a breakfast sandwich and nodding along with everything Marcus said, but there were also some new faces in the crowd. A woman named Patricia, who worked as a nurse at the nearby hospital, had stopped to see what all the commotion was about. An elderly gentleman named Mr. Rodriguez, who was visiting his daughter in the neighborhood, had been walking by when he heard the laughter and decided to investigate. A young father named Tom was waiting for the bus with his 6-year-old daughter, Emma, who kept asking questions about why everyone was laughing at the nice lady. Marcus was feeling so confident that he decided to take his performance to the next level. Instead of just talking about Sarah from a distance, he walked closer to where she was sitting. His audience followed behind him like he was leading a parade. Marcus stood just a few feet away from Sarah and began speaking directly about her as if she was not even there. Marcus said that he had been watching this woman for weeks, and she clearly had some kind of mental problem that made her think she was connected to music. He said she probably went home every night and told her cats about her imaginary piano concerts. Marcus made exaggerated gestures with his hands to imitate how Sarah touched the piano keys, and his audience laughed louder than they ever had before. Sarah continued wiping the piano keys, but her movements became slower and more deliberate. Her jaw was set a little tighter, and there was a slight tremor in her hands that had nothing to do with the cold weather. For the first time since this daily torture had begun, Sarah turned her head slightly and looked directly at Marcus with eyes that held decades of wisdom and pain. Marcus saw her looking at him and felt a surge of excitement. Finally, he was getting a reaction from the mysterious piano woman. This was the moment he had been building toward all week. Marcus decided it was time to issue a direct challenge that would expose Sarah once and for all as a fraud and a pretender. Marcus spread his arms wide and addressed his audience like a ringmaster at a circus. He announced that he was tired of this daily charade and it was time to settle the question once and for all. Marcus declared that if this woman really knew anything about music, she should prove it right here and right now in front of everyone. He said that if she could not play something recognizable, then she should admit she was just wasting everyone's time and find somewhere else to spend her mornings. The crowd pressed closer as Marcus's challenge hung in the air like a dare that could not be ignored. People were holding up their phones to record what they expected to be an embarrassing moment for the old woman. Some of them were smiling in anticipation, while others looked uncomfortable about what was happening but did not want to miss the show. Sarah stopped cleaning the piano and placed her cloth carefully back in her purse. She looked at Marcus for a long moment and then at the crowd of people who were all staring at her expectantly. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet and steady and filled with a dignity that cut through all the noise and laughter around her. Sarah asked Marcus if he really wanted her to play something on the piano. Her question was simple and direct, but there was something in the way she asked it that made a few people in the crowd shift uncomfortably. Marcus felt a tiny flutter of uncertainty in his stomach, but he was too committed to his performance to back down now. Marcus crossed his arms and declared loudly that yes, he absolutely wanted her to play something, and he was willing to bet money that she could not play even the simplest children's song. He said he was calling her bluff and challenging her to put up or shut up. Marcus turned to his audience and asked them if they wanted to see the piano lady finally reveal whether she was real or fake. Most of the crowd cheered and encouraged Marcus to keep pushing for a performance. But a few people were starting to have second thoughts about what was happening. Patricia, the nurse, had seen enough suffering in her job to recognize when someone was being genuinely hurt. Mr. Rodriguez remembered his own grandmother who had been mocked by younger people who did not understand her value. Tom was worried about what his daughter Emma was learning from watching adults behave this way. Frank, the old janitor, had been watching from the back of the crowd and could not stay silent any longer. He pushed forward and tried to tell Marcus that maybe he should leave the woman alone. Frank said that not everyone had to prove themselves to strangers and that maybe Marcus was taking his joke too far. But Marcus was riding high on the energy of his audience, and he dismissed Frank as just another old person who did not understand. Modern humor. Sarah stood up slowly from the wooden bench where she had been sitting every morning for weeks. The movement was graceful despite her age, and there was something almost ceremonial about the way she positioned herself. She walked the few steps to the piano bench with her back straight and her head held high. The crowd fell completely silent as they realized that their entertainment was about to take an unexpected turn. Sarah sat down on the piano bench and adjusted her position carefully. She placed her feet flat on the ground and her hands in her lap. She looked at the keys for a moment and then turned back to face Marcus and his audience. Her voice was still quiet, but it carried clearly in the morning air as she asked one final question. Sarah wanted to know if Marcus was absolutely certain that he wanted her to play, because she was not in the habit of performing for people who had already made up their minds about her. She said that music was not a game or a trick to be used for proving points to strangers. Sarah explained that when someone asked a musician to play, they were asking for something sacred and precious, and it should not be done lightly or for the wrong reasons. Marcus felt like Sarah was trying to make him look foolish by turning his simple challenge into some kind of philosophical discussion. He told her to stop making excuses and just play something or admit that she was a fake. Marcus said he did not want to hear any more speeches about the meaning of music, and he definitely did not want to be lectured by some old woman who had been pretending to be something she was not. Sarah nodded once and turned back to face the piano. She placed her hands on the keys for the first time since she had started coming to this bus stop. The crowd leaned forward in anticipation, and Marcus felt a moment of triumph as he prepared to watch the old woman embarrass herself in front of everyone. Sarah closed her eyes for just a moment and took a deep breath. The morning air filled her lungs, and she could hear the sounds of the city around her, but everything seemed to fade into the background. When she opened her eyes again, there was something different about her posture and the way she held her hands above the keys. The transformation was so subtle that most people in the crowd did not notice it, but Frank, the old janitor, saw it right away. Sarah's fingers touched the piano keys, and the first notes that came out were so soft and gentle that some people in the crowd almost missed them. But within seconds, the music began to grow and fill the space around the bus stop with sounds that nobody had expected to hear. Sarah was playing Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, and every single note was perfect. The change in the atmosphere was immediate and dramatic. Marcus had been standing with his arms crossed and a smug smile on his face, but the smile disappeared as soon as he heard the first few measures of the complex classical piece. His mouth fell open and he took a step backward as if the music was pushing him away from the piano. Lisa from the bank had been holding her phone up to record what she thought would be an embarrassing moment, but now she found herself lowering the device and just listening in amazement. Derek, the college student, and his friends stopped talking and joking as the beautiful melodies washed over them. Robert the insurance salesman forgot about his breakfast sandwich and let it fall to the ground. The music that came from Sarah's fingers was not just technically perfect, but filled with emotion, an experience that could only come from decades of serious training and performance. Every phrase was shaped with the skill of a master musician, and every dynamic change was executed with the precision of someone who had played this piece hundreds of times before. People walking by on the sidewalk stopped in their tracks when they heard the music. Cars driving down Central Avenue slowed down as drivers tried to figure out where the beautiful sounds were coming from. Windows opened in the apartments above the street as residents leaned out to listen to the unexpected concert happening at their neighborhood bus stop. Sarah's hands moved across the keyboard with incredible grace and speed. The difficult technical passages that would challenge even advanced piano students flowed from her fingers like they were the most natural thing in the world. Her left hand played the complex bass lines while her right hand danced through the intricate melodies that made Chopin's music so beloved by classical music lovers everywhere. Marcus felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. Everything he had believed about the old woman was crumbling as he listened to music that was clearly being played by someone with extraordinary skill and training. The cruel jokes he had been making all week suddenly seemed not just mean but incredibly stupid. He had been mocking someone who could do something he could never hope to achieve in 1,000 years. The crowd that had gathered to watch Sarah's humiliation was now witnessing something magical instead. Patricia the nurse felt tears forming in her eyes as she listened to the most beautiful piano playing she had ever heard in person. Mr. Rodriguez was reminded of the concerts he used to attend with his late wife and he had to wipe his eyes with his handkerchief. Little Emma, who had come to the bus stop with her father Tom, was staring up at Sarah with wide eyes full of wonder. She had never seen anyone play piano like this before, and she tugged on her father's coat to ask him if the nice lady was famous. Tom was too amazed to answer his daughter's question because he was trying to understand how he had been standing next to a world-class musician every morning without realizing it. Frank, the old janitor, was nodding his head in recognition as he listened to Sarah play. He had heard this piece performed many times during his years working at the music school, and he knew that very few pianists could handle its technical demands. Frank had suspected that Sarah was a trained musician, but even he had not imagined that she possessed this level of skill and artistry. The piano itself seemed to come alive under Sarah's touch. Despite its poor condition and the damage it had suffered from weather and vandalism, it was producing sounds of incredible beauty. Sarah knew exactly how to work with the instrument's limitations and bring out its best qualities. The keys that stuck for other people responded perfectly to her experienced touch. As Sarah moved into the middle section of the ballade, the music became even more complex and emotionally powerful. Her face showed the concentration of a master craftsperson, but also the joy of someone who was finally able to express herself through the language she knew best. This was not just a performance, but a conversation between Sarah and the music that had been her life's work. The crowd continued to grow as word spread through the neighborhood that something extraordinary was happening at the bus stop. Office workers who had already caught their buses were getting off at the next stop and walking back to hear the music. People in nearby shops were closing their doors and coming outside to listen. Even the city bus drivers were parking their vehicles and joining the audience. Marcus stood frozen in the middle of the crowd as the reality of his mistake became clear to him. He had spent weeks making fun of someone who was infinitely more talented and accomplished than he would ever be. The woman he had called crazy and fake was demonstrating abilities that put her in the top tier of musicians in the entire world. Jake, his work friend, was standing nearby with his mouth hanging open in shock. Jake kept looking back and forth between Sarah and Marcus as if he could not believe what was happening. All of the people who had been laughing at Marcus's jokes earlier in the week were now completely silent and focused on the incredible music. Coming from the old piano, Sarah's playing continued to build in intensity and complexity as she approached the climactic section of the ballade. Her fingers flew across the keys with speed and accuracy that seemed almost superhuman. The music filled not just the air around the bus stop, but seemed to reach into the hearts and souls of everyone who was listening. The emotional power of the performance was overwhelming many people in the audience. Some were crying openly, while others stood in stunned silence trying to process what they were witnessing. The music spoke to something deep inside each listener and reminded them of the beauty and wonder that could exist in the world when true artistry was allowed to flourish. As Sarah moved toward the final section of the piece, the music became both more gentle and more profound. She played with the wisdom of someone who had lived through joy and sorrow and had found ways to express both through her art. Every note seemed to carry the weight of experience and the lightness of pure musical joy. The last notes of the ballad rang out over Central Avenue and then slowly faded into silence. Sarah kept her hands on the keys for a moment longer, as if she was reluctant to break the connection between herself and the music. When she finally lifted her fingers from the keyboard, the silence that followed was deeper and more complete than anything the busy city street had experienced in years. For several long seconds, nobody moved or spoke or even breathed loudly. The entire crowd was processing what they had just witnessed and trying to understand how their ordinary Friday morning had been transformed into something extraordinary. Sarah sat quietly at the piano bench with her hands folded in her lap and waited to see what would happen next. The silence that followed Sarah's performance seemed to stretch on forever until suddenly the sound of clapping began to fill the air. It started with just one person and then spread through the entire crowd like a wave. The applause grew louder and more enthusiastic as people realized they had just witnessed something truly remarkable happening right in front of them on an ordinary city street. Marcus stood in the middle of the clapping crowd, feeling like his world had been turned completely upside down. His face was red with shame and embarrassment as he understood how terribly wrong he had been about Sarah. The woman he had been mocking and insulting for weeks was clearly a musician of extraordinary talent and skill. Marcus felt smaller and more foolish than he had ever felt in his entire life. An older gentleman in a dark blue coat pushed his way through the crowd toward the piano. His name was Professor Williams, and he had been walking to his job at the university music department when he heard the beautiful music coming from the bus stop. Professor Williams had spent his entire career studying and teaching classical music, and he recognized both the piece Sarah had played and the incredible level of skill it required. Professor Williams approached Sarah with obvious excitement and respect in his voice. He told her that he had just heard one of the most beautiful performances of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 that he had experienced in his 40 years as a music professor. He asked Sarah where she had studied and if she was currently performing anywhere, because talent like hers deserved to be shared with much larger audiences. Sarah smiled gently at Professor Williams and thanked him for his kind words. She explained that she had not performed in public for several years now, but that music had been her life and her greatest joy for most of her adult years. Sarah told him that she had studied at some of the finest music schools in the country and had been fortunate enough to perform on many famous stages around the world. The crowd pressed closer to hear Sarah's story as she began to share details about her background that explained everything they had just witnessed. Sarah revealed that her full name was Sarah Martinez and that she had spent over 25 years as the principal pianist for the Metropolitan Opera Company in New York City. She had performed at Carnegie Hall and Lincoln Center and had traveled to concert halls across Europe and Asia during her career. People in the crowd gasped and whispered to each other as they realized they had been in the presence of a world-famous musician without knowing it. Lisa from the bank pulled out her phone and quickly searched for Sarah's name online. Within seconds, she found articles and reviews from major newspapers praising Sarah's performances and calling her one of the most gifted pianists of her generation. Sarah continued her story and explained that she had also taught piano at the prestigious Juilliard School for 15 years before retiring from performing. She had worked with some of the most talented young musicians in the world and had helped launch the careers of many successful pianists who were now performing in symphony orchestras and concert halls around the globe. Frank the old janitor stepped forward from the back of the crowd with tears in his eyes. He told Sarah that he had worked at the downtown music school for 30 years and that he remembered seeing her picture on the wall in the Hall of Famous Alumni. Frank said he had always wondered what had happened to the brilliant young woman in the photograph, and now he knew she had been sitting right here at his neighborhood bus stop all along. Sarah's eyes lit up when she heard Frank mention the music school. She remembered the kind janitor who had always made sure the practice rooms were clean and the pianos were properly maintained. Sarah told Frank that people like him were the unsung heroes who made it possible for musicians to do their best work, and she thanked him for his years of dedicated service to music education. Marcus felt like he needed to do something to make up for his cruel behavior, but he did not know how to approach Sarah or what to say to her. The weight of his mistakes was crushing down on him, and he could barely look at the woman he had treated so badly. Jake, his work friend, put a hand on Marcus's shoulder and told him he needed to apologize right away before the crowd dispersed and he lost his chance forever. Marcus walked slowly toward Sarah with his head down and his hands shaking slightly. When he reached the piano bench, he looked up at her face and saw kindness in her eyes, despite everything he had put her through. Marcus began to speak in a voice that was barely above a whisper as he tried to find the right words to express how sorry he was for his behavior. Marcus told Sarah that he had no excuse for the way he had treated her and that he was deeply ashamed of himself. He explained that he had been stressed about work and had taken out his frustrations on her in a way that was completely unfair and wrong. Marcus said that he now understood he had been mocking someone who had achieved more in her field than he could ever hope to achieve in his own career. Sarah listened to Marcus's apology with the same peaceful expression she had worn throughout all of his earlier insults. When he finished speaking, she reached out and gently touched his arm. Sarah told Marcus that she appreciated his apology and that she understood how easy it was for people to make assumptions about others without knowing their full story. She said that everyone deserved a chance to learn from their mistakes and become better people. Professor Williams asked Sarah why she had stopped performing and what had brought her to this particular bus stop every morning. Sarah's expression became more serious and sad as she explained that her husband of 40 years had passed away the previous winter. He had been a violinist with the same opera company where she had worked, and they had shared a lifetime of making music together. Sarah told the crowd that after her husband died, she had moved to a small apartment in this neighborhood to start a new chapter of her life. She said that coming to sit by the piano every morning had become her way of staying connected to music and to the memory of her husband, who had always encouraged her to play whenever she felt sad or lost. The piano reminded her that music was still alive in the world, even when everything else seemed to have changed. The crowd listened to Sarah's story with deep respect and understanding. Many people wiped away tears as they realized that the woman they had been watching every morning was dealing with grief and loss while still finding ways to bring beauty into the world. Patricia, the nurse, stepped forward and told Sarah that she worked at the nearby hospital and that she would love to arrange for Sarah to play for patients who could benefit from the healing power of music. Little Emma broke away from her father, Tom, and ran up to Sarah with excitement in her eyes. Emma told Sarah that she was learning to play piano at school and asked if Sarah would be willing to teach her some songs. Sarah smiled and said she would be honored to help Emma with her musical education and that she believed every child should have the chance to discover the joy of making music. As the crowd began to disperse, people continued to approach Sarah to thank her for the beautiful performance and to ask if she would consider playing at the bus stop again. Sarah promised that she would continue to come every morning and that anyone who wanted to listen to music was welcome to join her. She said that music was meant to be shared and that she had learned today that there were many people in her new neighborhood who appreciated the gift of live performance. Marcus was the last person to leave the bus stop. Before he walked away, he turned back to Sarah and promised that he would never again make assumptions about people based on their appearance or circumstances. Sarah nodded and told him that she looked forward to seeing him at the bus stop again, and that she hoped they could start over as neighbors who respected each other. Marcus walked away feeling like he had learned one of the most important lessons of his life.